Before the world ever whispered the name Robert Prevost, before the Vatican walls echoed with his footsteps, there was a man few truly knew, a man whose life wasn't scripted by privilege or ease, but carved from trials that demanded resilience most wouldn't endure. It's easy now, seeing him cloaked in sacred garments, to forget the weight of the path he walked, because behind every title, behind every crown, robe, or name etched into history is a person who once stood alone, faced their fears, battled their weaknesses, and made a decision most people avoid for a lifetime to become something more than what the world expected. Robert Prevost didn't stumble into leadership. He wasn't born into it, and he certainly didn't inherit it. He built it. He bled for it. In the silent nights when no one was applauding, no crowds cheering, no spotlight waiting for his arrival, that's when the real foundation was laid. It wasn't about position, it was about purpose. It wasn't about title, it was about truth. Because long before he became Pope, he was a man with a vision bigger than his circumstances. He understood something most people refuse to accept, that adversity doesn't arrive to break you, it comes to reveal you. And when it came for him, it didn't ask permission. There were days when walking the righteous path meant isolation, when holding firm to his convictions meant becoming the outsider in rooms filled with comfortable conformity, when choosing faith over acceptance meant being misunderstood, criticized, even abandoned by those too fragile to stand where he stood. But those were the very moments that sculpted the man. You see, the world loves to celebrate the destination, but ignores the war that forged the character capable of carrying it. Every scar, every unanswered prayer, every sleepless night battling self-doubt and temptation, every step taken when fear whispered, "You're not enough." That's the price of real leadership. And Robert Prevost paid it in full. What makes this man remarkable isn't just what he represents now, it's the relentless journey that brought him here. Because it's easy to have faith when the sky is clear, when the path is smooth, when the crowd is clapping. It's something entirely different when the storm won't pass, when you're carrying burdens no one else can see, when you have to walk alone through seasons that feel like they'll never end. That's where Prevost proved who he was. He became a man who wasn't defined by the praise of men or the fear of their opinions, a man who understood that integrity isn't a slogan, it's a decision made in private long before the public ever knows your name. A man who stood when it was easier to bow, who spoke truth when it would have been simpler to stay silent. And that unshakable resolve is what separates those who wear titles from those who carry legacies. See, there's a lesson in this for every one of us. Too many people wait for the perfect moment to become the person they were meant to be. They hesitate, stall, and make excuses about timing, about circumstances, about whether or not anyone will notice. Robert Prevost didn't wait for validation. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't care who was watching, because he knew the man you build in the dark is the man the world will need in the light. He understood that discipline is a lonely road, that greatness isn't birthed from comfort, but from discomfort willingly embraced, the kind of discomfort that strips away the unnecessary, that exposes your weaknesses so you can fortify them, that demands you bury your excuses and rise above your limitations. And while others feared that discomfort, Prevost chased it. He chased the difficult conversations, the uncomfortable silences, the solitude where real reflection happens. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because he knew it was the only way to become the kind of man who could bear the weight of leadership without crumbling beneath it. And when the day came, when the call arrived, when the eyes of the world turned toward him, Robert Prevost didn't become someone new, He revealed who he had been becoming all along. The robe didn't make him. The title didn't validate him. It merely confirmed what adversity had already proven. He was built for this. That's what makes his story powerful. Not the ceremony, not the title, but the testimony. Because while others waited for their moment, he was preparing for his mission. While others hid from pain, he found strength within it. And while the world measured success by status, he measured it by surrender. Surrender to discipline, to principle, to calling. We all have moments when we're faced with the same choice. Stay where it's safe or step into the unknown. Live according to what's comfortable or chase what's necessary. Robert Prevost is proof that if you're willing to endure, to sacrifice, to become, there's no title too high, no mission too impossible, no calling too unreachable. Because before you lead nations, you must first master yourself. And that is the man behind the title. What separates a man like Robert Prevost from the countless others who sought titles, power, or recognition isn't mere ambition. It's something deeper, something stronger, a force that doesn't sway with the opinions of others or tremble in the presence of adversity. It's the kind of belief most people only pretend to have until life demands proof. Because belief, real belief, isn't something you claim, it's something you prove when you've got every reason to quit, every excuse to fold, and yet you keep moving forward. Robert Prevost didn't ascend because he craved status. He rose because his mind was anchored in something unshakable, a belief that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how high the climb, no matter how heavy the burden, what was meant for him could not be stolen, delayed, or denied. And it wasn't arrogance, it wasn't ego, it was certainty. The kind of certainty born through trial, not comfort, through rejection, not applause, through years of moving silently, building strength in the places no one else was willing to enter. People often talk about belief as if it's this light, feel-good thing, a cute slogan to whisper in the mirror before the world punches you in the mouth. But for Prevost, belief wasn't soft, it was violent, it was relentless. It wasn't about motivation, it was about discipline. Because while motivation fades, discipline makes you move whether you feel like it or not. And that discipline was fueled by a mindset that refused to entertain failure, weakness, or fear. He knew something most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. You either master your mind or it masters you. And a man with a weak mind will forever be a prisoner to his circumstances. Robert Prevost was never a prisoner. Not to people's expectations, not to the fears that come with leadership, not to the doubts that creep in when no one's watching. He built a mind so fortified that when adversity struck, it didn't break him, it sharpened him. There's a certain peace that comes when you stop chasing approval and start chasing alignment. Alignment with your values, with your mission, with the purpose that was placed on your life before you ever took your first breath. And Prevost understood this better than most. He wasn't concerned with being liked. He wasn't obsessed with trends, optics, or public favor. His only obsession was with fulfilling the assignment on his life. And when you live like that, when your loyalty lies with principle over popularity, the world notices. But belief like that is forged, not found. It's built in the quiet hours when doubt whispers and you answer back louder. In the days when everything falls apart and you refuse to lower your standard. In the moments when compromise seems easier, but you choose conviction anyway. That's where the roots of Prevost's mindset grew deep. Deep enough to withstand the pressure of a world that changes its loyalties by the hour. Deep enough to remain steady in a position where most crumble under the weight of expectation. And it wasn't just belief in himself, it was belief in a higher order, in divine timing, in the idea that what's meant for you can't be taken by men, and that every setback, every closed door, every lonely season is a necessary step in the preparation for greatness. Most people pray for easy roads. Prevost prayed for the strength to endure the hard ones because he knew ease never builds empires, the struggle does. What's powerful about his story is how it reminds us that belief isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It moves quietly, decisively. It walks into rooms where it isn't welcomed and stands anyway. It makes decisions others are too afraid to consider. It carries itself with a calm confidence because it knows who it belongs to and what it was sent for. And Robert Prevost carried himself like that long before anyone gave him a title, because you don't rise to the level of your title. You rise to the level of your standards. In every season, in every role, whether leading a congregation or walking through personal loss, his belief remained constant. Not because circumstances were easy, but because his mind was anchored in a truth bigger than circumstance. He understood that storms don't last, but the man you become in them determines the rest of your life. And that mindset is why, when opportunity came, he wasn't surprised. He was prepared. You see, real preparation isn't about external accolades or public validation. It's about internal mastery. Prevost spent years mastering the one thing most people neglect, themselves. He mastered his emotions so they wouldn't control him. He mastered his tongue so his words would carry weight. He mastered his thoughts so fear would never rob him of his future. And when you master yourself, you become unstoppable, because there's no enemy more dangerous than a man who controls his mind. And it wasn't just for his sake. It was for the people he was called to lead. Because Robert Prevost knew what many leaders forget. You cannot lead others if you are led by your emotions. You cannot inspire strength if you crumble under pressure. You cannot demand excellence if you tolerate mediocrity within yourself. His belief wasn't selfish. It was built for the battles of others, for the people who would one day need a leader unshaken by the chaos around him. And now, standing where he stands, his mind remains unshaken, not because the world is calm, but because his inner world has been conquered. And that is the lesson. That belief isn't a feeling, it's a discipline, a way of life, a decision made every single day to reject fear, to embrace struggle, and to walk with a purpose that doesn't flinch. It's what carried him through the darkest nights and what will continue to carry him in the light. Because no matter the crown, no matter the title, the greatest strength any man can have is an unbreakable mind anchored in unshakable belief. Some men chase positions, claw for power, and beg for recognition. And then there are the few who are chosen by something greater. You can feel the difference when you hear their name, when you watch how they carry themselves, when you witness how they endure things others couldn't survive. Robert Prevost wasn't a man desperate for status. He wasn't the type to parade himself around or position his life to win the approval of people. What set him apart wasn't his ambition, but the undeniable sense that there was a calling attached to his life long before the world ever noticed him. And that's the part most people don't understand. Some roles aren't seized by force, they arrive by calling. And a calling doesn't ask you if you feel ready, if the timing is convenient, or if the road looks easy. It comes in the middle of chaos, when everything seems impossible, and it demands you answer with your life. Robert Prevost didn't audition for greatness. It pursued him. It pressed itself upon his shoulders in silent moments when no one else could see the battles he was fighting or the burdens he carried. And instead of running, he made a decision that would shape his destiny. He stayed. He stayed when it was hard. He stayed when it was lonely. He stayed when every voice around him said it would be easier to walk away. That's the thing about purpose. It doesn't care about your comfort. It will strip you of everything you don't need and force you to become the man your assignment requires. And that's exactly what it did to Prevost. The people who knew him long before his name made headlines will tell you he was different. Not louder, not flashier, just anchored, solid in a way that made others uncomfortable. Because deep down, people can sense when a man is carrying a weight they don't understand. And it's not arrogance. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows they're being prepared for a moment bigger than themselves. While others were chasing temporary victories, Prevost was building himself in silence. Every hardship, every closed door, every betrayal and disappointment wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Because before a man can lead, he must be broken of the need to be liked. Before he can carry the weight of responsibility, he must learn to carry the loneliness that comes with it. Robert Prevost, he walked straight into it. There's a certain kind of peace that settles on a man when he stops negotiating with his purpose, when he stops asking, why me, and starts asking, what's next? That was Prevost. His life became a quiet example of obedience to something greater than his own comfort. And while the world chased noise, he chased stillness, because he understood that clarity doesn't come from crowds, it comes from solitude. That's where men are called. That's where strength is forged. It's not hard to find people who want power. It's rare to find someone who is built for it. Because real power isn't about control, it's about sacrifice. It's about carrying weight that breaks others, about standing in the gap when no one else will, about making decisions that cost you personally but serve something bigger than yourself. Robert Prevost's story is marked by those decisions, not the ones that made headlines, but the quiet, unseen moments when he chose discipline over ease, conviction over popularity, and duty over desire. He knew early on that a calling doesn't come without cost. It will isolate you. It will strip away relationships that can't handle your growth. It will demand that you abandon the small version of yourself that people were comfortable with. And Prevost wasn't afraid to pay that price. He understood that the higher the calling, the heavier the burden. That's why you won't find him complaining about the pressure, because the pressure was never his enemy. It was his preparation. And when the world finally looked his way, when the position was offered, when the title was placed upon him, he wasn't caught off guard. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was ready. Not because life had been easy, but because it had been intentional. Every difficult season, every unseen victory, every moment of private discipline had been leading to this. That's the power of being chosen by a calling. It doesn't matter if it takes years. It doesn't matter who doubts you. It doesn't even matter if you doubt yourself some days. Because what's meant for you will always find its way to you as long as you stay faithful to the process. Prevost's life reminds us that the greatest moments aren't won in public, they're secured in private, in those invisible moments when no one is watching. And you have every excuse to compromise, but you don't. When you could water down your truth to make others comfortable, but you choose to stay firm. When you could avoid responsibility, but you shoulder it instead. That's where leaders are made. That's where legacies are born. The difference between a man chasing a title and a man answering a calling is this. One wants to be seen, the other is willing to be invisible for as long as it takes. Robert Prevost was willing to be invisible, willing to work in the shadows, willing to be overlooked, because his trust wasn't in people, it was in purpose. And that kind of man is dangerous to mediocrity, because you can't intimidate someone whose validation doesn't come from you. You can't control a man whose peace comes from within. And you can't stop a man chosen by a mission larger than himself. His story isn't just about the role he holds today. It's about the years he spent preparing when no one cared. It's about the battles he fought alone, the nights he questioned everything but still woke up and moved forward, the weight he carried without complaint because he knew what was coming would demand nothing less. And when it arrived, he didn't flinch, because when a calling chooses you, all you can do is rise to meet it. When a man like Robert Prevost steps into a position of power, what truly matters isn't just what he does, it's how he makes people feel in his presence. It's what shifts in the hearts of those watching. Because history has shown us countless leaders who held titles but left no mark on the soul of their people. And then, once in a generation, comes someone whose quiet strength, whose calm certainty, and whose unshakable character resonates so deeply that it forces people to pause, reflect, and reevaluate their own lives. That is the unspoken influence of Robert Prevost, a presence that doesn't demand attention, but commands it. From the moment his name began to echo through sacred halls and the world's eyes settled upon him, there was an undeniable sense that something different was unfolding. It wasn't just about a new leader. It wasn't about a man in ceremonial garments. It was about a reminder to every person watching that greatness is possible without theatrics, that you can be powerful and humble, that you can be relentless and compassionate, that you can carry the weight of the world without losing your soul in the process. The truth is, people don't remember speeches as much as they remember how a person made them feel. And Prevost's greatest strength has always been his ability to bring a kind of peace into chaotic rooms, to steady hearts in moments of fear, to quietly remind those who've lost their way that the storm will pass, and when it does, you'll still be standing. He never needed to be the loudest voice in the room because the authority in his presence spoke louder than words ever could. This is what makes his influence so profound. It's not just about doctrine, position, or politics. It's about the invisible things, the unrecorded conversations with broken people, the private prayers over burdens no one else knows about, the steady hand placed on a trembling shoulder when life feels unbearable. That's the kind of leadership people never forget, not because it made headlines, but because it restored hope in a world that's desperate for it. The beauty of Robert Prevost's rise isn't just in the position he now holds, but in what his journey represents to everyone else watching. It's proof that you don't have to compromise your values to climb higher, that you don't have to chase attention to have influence, that you can move with discipline, patience, and authenticity and still arrive at the highest levels of authority. And in a generation obsessed with instant validation, his story is a powerful contradiction to the idea that you have to sell yourself to be seen. People who come in contact with him often describe a stillness, a groundedness, as if standing in front of him slows everything down, not because of superstition, not because of image, but because you're standing in front of a man who knows exactly who he is, what he's here to do, and what he refuses to become. And that's rare, because most people wear masks. They perform for applause, they posture for approval, they live for acceptance. Robert Prevost stands for something far more valuable. He stands for truth. And in a world drowning in noise, people cling to anything real. What's incredible is how his influence stretches beyond religion, beyond borders, beyond titles. It's a human thing, because at our core, every person alive longs for certainty, for leadership that feels safe, for strength that doesn't threaten but protects. Prevost embodies that balance. And it forces people to take inventory of their own character, to ask themselves if they are living with integrity when no one's watching, if they're carrying out their responsibilities with the same quiet discipline, if they're chasing approval or chasing purpose. That's the real mark of a leader, not what people say in public, but what they confess in private. The unspoken respect that grows in the hearts of those who witness your consistency. And that's what Robert Prevost has built, not through grand performances, but through decades of unwavering character. And now with the eyes of the world on him, he hasn't changed. He hasn't softened his convictions to fit the crowd. He hasn't diluted his discipline to avoid discomfort. He moves with the same intentionality, the same humility, the same fire he carried when no one was watching. It's easy for people to underestimate the power of consistency, but that's where real influence lives, not in single moments of greatness, but in the repeated choice to rise with discipline when no one cares, to act with honor when it goes unnoticed, to speak truth when it costs you something. That's what shapes a legacy, not the title, but the trail you leave in the hearts of people you've quietly impacted along the way. And as Prevost continues to navigate this new role, the lesson for the rest of us isn't about emulating his title. It's about emulating his mindset, the mindset that understands leadership is service, that power is responsibility, that authority isn't for self-promotion, but for the protection of those under your care, and that the greatest form of influence you'll ever have isn't what you post, say, or announce. It's how you live every day when no one's watching, when it's inconvenient, when it would be easier to cut corners and no one would notice. That's where character is built. And that's where Robert Prevost has quietly set an example the world would do well to follow. Because long after positions are passed down, after headlines fade, after names are replaced by new ones, what endures is how you made people feel. The strength you gave them to keep going, the peace you brought into their storm, the conviction you reminded them was still worth holding. And Robert Prevost's influence will be remembered not because of the position he held, but because of the person he chose to become. Some moments in history aren't just about titles or events. They become symbols, markers in time where everything before it feels like a long, winding road leading to that precise instant. And Robert Prevost's rise to the position of Pope XIV carries that same weight. It's not simply about a man assuming a role. It's about what that moment says to every person watching, about what it represents to the silent, unseen souls carrying burdens they can't speak about. It reminds people everywhere that a lifetime of discipline, sacrifice, and quiet obedience to something bigger than yourself is never wasted, that the world may overlook you, underestimate you, dismiss you, but when it's time, no one can deny what was always meant to be yours. The beauty in this moment is how it bridges past, present, and future, because Robert Prevost isn't just stepping into a role, he's carrying the collective weight of every name, every struggle, every man and woman who dared to believe that integrity still mattered. His appointment isn't just a personal victory, it's a reminder to those living in the shadows, those doing the right thing when no one's clapping, those choosing principle over popularity, that eventually light finds its way to those who remain faithful. And what makes this moment so significant isn't the grandeur of the ceremony or the symbolism of ancient traditions. It's the invisible, undeniable impact of one man's lifelong consistency. Because this world is filled with people chasing influence, desperate to be known, addicted to attention, while the ones truly worthy of it rarely seek it out. That's what made this moment feel different. The quiet sense that a man who had spent decades doing the right thing without asking for recognition was finally being recognized not because of politics, but because of providence. You could see it in the faces of those present. Not the shallow excitement of celebrity, but the deep, resonating respect of those who knew what it cost to get here. The old friends who remembered him before titles ever attached to his name, the people who witnessed him stand firm when it wasn't popular, who saw him carry weight others wouldn't touch, who knew that every scar, every sacrifice, every silent night spent wrestling with decisions most couldn't imagine had built the kind of leader you don't find often. This is the part the world rarely notices. The years of unseen preparation, the nights of doubt, the burden of responsibility without applause, the moments when it would have been easier to compromise, but he didn't. And now, standing at the intersection of history, it's clear that all of it was necessary because some roles don't require talent, they require endurance. They require the kind of fortitude forged only in fire, the kind of resolve built when no one's watching, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't rush your moment, you prepared for it. That's why this appointment hits different, because in a time where many leaders are created in boardrooms and social media feeds, Robert Prevost was built in silence, in discipline, in faithfulness to unseen assignments, in small decisions stacked over decades that no one cheered for. And it proves to every person out there questioning whether their integrity is worth it, whether their discipline matters, whether their sacrifices will ever lead to anything, that yes, it does. Because if there's anything this moment teaches us, it's that purpose moves on its own time. It doesn't follow trends. It isn't moved by applause. It arrives when it's ready, and when it does, it favors the ones who were faithful long before the world cared. That's what Robert Prevost embodies. Not the kind of influence you grab, but the kind you grow into. Influence that isn't about image, but impact. And perhaps the greatest lesson from this chapter of his story is what it says about the kind of men this world still needs. Men who aren't desperate to be followed, but willing to lead. Men who don't flinch when pressure comes. Men who carry themselves with the kind of quiet authority that can only come from years of private battles. Men who understand that their greatest responsibility isn't what they gain, but what they're willing to give. Robert Prevost has become a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to sell your soul for status, when you choose the long, lonely road of character over shortcuts, when you understand that leadership isn't granted by men, it's affirmed by history, and in time, history remembers those who held the line when others broke, who spoke truth when it cost them, who carried weight others wouldn't. And Prevost now stands in that space, not because he chased it, but because he proved worthy of it. The world is watching this moment not because it's about one man, but because it holds a mirror up to everyone else. It forces people to ask themselves what kind of legacy they're building, if their actions would stand the test of time, if their influence would survive without a title, because in the end, positions fade, headlines disappear, and applause dies down. But character remains. And Prevost's story is a living reminder that it's not about how quickly you rise, but how well you're built when you do. In a generation obsessed with image, Robert Prevost represents substance. In a culture chasing shortcuts, he stands for discipline. In a world starving for authenticity, he offers quiet, consistent strength. And though this chapter of his story is one the world will remember, the truth is, the people closest to him, the ones who watched him when no one cared, already knew. They knew it was never about the title. It was about the man